The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that doesn't come from routine, but from something that shifts the air. On day 10 of the federal trial against Sean "Diddy" Combs, what was supposed to be a series of dry procedural motions turned into the moment everything changed. At 2:07 p.m., the prosecution requested permission to unseal a piece of evidence. It wasn't just any document or testimony, it was a video, footage that had never been seen outside the investigation. When the judge granted the request, murmurs rippled through the gallery. Reporters stopped writing mid-sentence. Even Diddy's legal team looked uneasy. 2 monitors were rolled into the room. The lights dimmed. The jury leaned forward. And then, grainy black and white surveillance footage filled the screens. The timestamp read 2 a.m., November 13th, 2018, just 3 nights before Kim Porter was found dead. The angle showed a hallway inside her Tuca Lake home. The image was low resolution, but clear enough. A man, barefoot in a hoodie, moved slowly through the corridor. As he came closer into view, there was no doubt. It was Diddy. Calm, focused, not trying to hide. He didn't knock. He didn't call out. He just placed his hand on the knob of Kim's bedroom door and walked in. Then, static. For 12 full seconds, the screen turned to black. No sound, no video, no explanation. When the footage resumed, the hallway was empty. The door was shut. Diddy was gone. And so was the idea that this case was just about rumors. What followed in the courtroom wasn't chaos. It was something more unnerving, a thick, collective stillness. The prosecutor let the silence speak. Then, without raising his voice, he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is what was recorded 3 nights before Miss Porter was found dead in that home." He didn't need to say more. The jury had seen it. The gallery had felt it. Something real had entered the trial, and it didn't come from speculation. It came from a time-stamped, sealed, courtroom-verified recording, but this moment didn't stand alone. It wasn't just a chilling late-night visit. Prosecutors contextualized it with what came before, the warnings. Kim Porter's final text, messages, her journal entries, her whispered fears to friends that someone was watching, her voicemail to her lawyer just a day earlier saying, "He's back. I heard the gate. He's not supposed to be here." And above all, the reality that Kim Porter, mother of Diddy's children, confidant in his empire, had been preparing to speak out. She had documents, names, stories. She was writing a memoir. She told friends, "If I ever tell the full story, none of them survive it." Now the world was hearing part of that story, and it wasn't through a book deal or media exclusive. It was from a courtroom where, for the first time, the silence around Kim Porter's death wasn't being maintained. It was being broken. And the footage, those missing 12 seconds, might just be the crack that lets everything else flood in. Kim Porter wasn't just another name in Sean "Diddy" Combs' orbit. She was central, his longtime partner, the mother of 3 of his children, a woman who had spent nearly 2 decades inside the inner sanctum of his life. From glitzy red carpets to closed-door meetings, from public parenting moments to late night. Phone calls, Kim wasn't a bystander, she was a witness. And in the final months before her death, something had shifted. People close to her began noticing subtle changes. She was pulling back, canceling appearances, declining events she would have normally attended without hesitation. She told friends. She didn't feel safe. Not in a general way, but in a very specific shadow-over-your-shoulder kind of way. There was no single event that triggered the fear. It was a pattern. Late-night noises, the sound of a gate opening, a feeling that someone was there, the sense that the cameras, meant to protect her, weren't always working when they needed to be. And while friends might have chalked it up to stress or imagination, Kim herself was becoming more and more convinced. She was being watched, and not by strangers. Her texts were precise, her voice measured, her words intentional. This wasn't paranoia without cause. It was something deeper, something real. Her handwritten journal entries from October 2018 gave a glimpse into what she was thinking. In one, she wrote, "They think I'll stay quiet forever, but I'm tired. If something happens to me, it wasn't an accident." This wasn't just a fleeting fear, it was a written declaration. Kim was preparing for something. Whether it was exposure, confrontation, or escape, she was getting ready to act. And she was documenting everything. According to court records, Kim had started speaking to a journalist. Not just any journalist, but a seasoned investigative reporter known for exposing high-level abuse. In a sealed deposition, that journalist revealed Kim was planning to go public. She had dates, names, documents. She had begun organizing details of what she had witnessed over the years: private flights, locked-down parties, hush contracts, NDAs signed under duress. The more she spoke, the more she understood the risk she was taking. But her texts revealed one thing above all: clarity. She wasn't driven by revenge. One message read, "I don't want revenge. I just want the truth out before it's too late." Her environment in those final weeks was tense, heavy with unsaid things. Her teenage daughters were often out with cousins or friends, her nanny off duty in the evenings, leaving Kim alone, in a house that at times didn't feel like it belonged to just her. On November 10th, just days before her death, she messaged a cousin. "He was here again last night. I didn't see him, but I heard someone in the hall. Cameras didn't pick it up. It's like he knows when they're off." The idea that someone could manipulate her security system wasn't abstract. It was a reality she lived with, and it wasn't just messages. The jury was shown a voicemail she left on her attorney's line on November 12th, one day before the now infamous surveillance footage. Her voice was low, trembling. "He's back. I heard the gate. He's not supposed to be here, but the code still works. I locked my door. I'm scared." That voicemail wasn't discovered until after her death. Her attorney testified he never heard it in time, and hearing it in court now felt like hearing a warning bell that had gone ignored. Kim was preparing something. She was writing, maybe a memoir, maybe just a record of truth for her children or the world. She contacted a lawyer about the legal boundaries of publishing confidential information. She wasn't reckless, she was careful, but the urgency was growing. She was running out of time, and somehow she seemed to know it. On the night of November 13th, 2018, surveillance footage would later show her pouring tea and heading to bed around 10:45 p.m. The house was quiet, still. Her daughters had gone out for dinner with a cousin. No guests were expected. By all accounts, it should have been a peaceful evening. Instead, it became the last night she would ever be seen alive on camera. The footage presented in court captured the moment Diddy entered her home, barefoot, moving, silently through the side entrance. No alarms, no call, no knock. Just quiet entry with a code only 3 people knew. That code wasn't something handed out lightly. It was a personal override, the kind used by family or those trusted beyond question. And on that night, Diddy used it. From that moment on, the timeline became chillingly specific. At 2:11 a.m., the hallway camera caught Diddy walking toward Kim's bedroom door. He didn't hesitate. He didn't pause. He turned the knob and entered. Then, nothing. Static. Blackout. 12 seconds where the system registered no activity. No feed, no signal. A forensic expert later testified the system wasn't faulty. It had been accessed remotely. It had been shut down. And when the feed came back, Diddy was no longer in the hallway. The door was closed. The house, once again, looked empty. But something had changed. In the courtroom, that footage hit like a thunderclap. Not because of what was seen, but because of what wasn't. The missing seconds, paired with Kim's messages and her fearful recordings, turned a tragic death into a puzzle with increasingly ominous pieces. The jury didn't just see a man visiting an ex. They saw a timeline, one that pointed not just to presence, but to intention. Kim Porter's final environment wasn't just one of silence. It was filled with warnings, texted, recorded, written by hand. Warnings no one acted on in time. And now, in a federal courtroom, they're being heard for the first time, piece by piece, shaping a story that's no longer just personal. It's now public. And what began as subtle paranoia has become something no longer possible to ignore. What happened inside Kim Porter's house on November 13, 2018, wasn't just suspicious. It pointed to a sophisticated pattern of access, control, and silence. By the time the jury watched Sean "Diddy" Combs glide barefoot through her hallway at 2:11 a.m., prosecutors had already framed the footage with chilling precision. This wasn't a spontaneous visit. This wasn't a man dropping by unexpectedly. It was a controlled entry through a private side door that, according to security records, required an override code, one that wasn't accessible to just anyone. Only 3 people had that kind of access: Kim Porter, her head of security, and Diddy. That detail alone turned the footage from unusual into alarming. But it was what the footage didn't show that disturbed the courtroom most. As the jury watched Diddy push open Kim's bedroom door and enter, the feed abruptly cut to black. Static filled the screen for 12 full seconds. No movement, no sound, no explanation. When the video resumed, the hallway was empty. No Diddy, no motion, just silence. Prosecutors knew exactly what they were doing when they let that blackout sit in the courtroom. Because that missing footage wasn't a technical glitch. It was a digital void at the exact moment when answers mattered most. A digital forensics expert took the stand next. His testimony was clear, methodical, and devastating. The system used in Kim's home had no history of random failures, no storage issues, no firmware bugs, no maintenance problems. In fact, it had operated flawlessly for months before and after the date in question. What happened on November 13th, the expert explained, wasn't a malfunction. It was a manual interruption. Someone with administrative privileges had logged in remotely and shut off the feed for that one specific camera at that one specific moment. He pulled up the system logs. At exactly 2:14 a.m., a login was recorded. The IP address was untraceable, but the credentials used were clear: root access. The kind of credential that could only be held by someone deeply trusted. The defense scrambled to introduce doubt. Maybe it was a software update, they suggested. Maybe interference or signal degradation. But the expert shut that down quickly. The last update had occurred 2 weeks prior. There was no other record of interruption, drop-off, or access issues. And when the expert revealed who had those credentials, Kim, her head of security, and Diddy, the courtroom buzzed again. There was no evidence of a hack, no unauthorized access, no password tampering. Whoever disabled that camera did so knowingly and legally, at least from an access standpoint. What that meant, in no uncertain terms, was that the surveillance system inside Kim Porter's home, the system designed to protect her, had been used against her. The blackout wasn't a fluke. It was a targeted move, and the only people with the keys to make that move were either the victim, a trusted bodyguard, or the man currently on trial. As the courtroom absorbed this, the prosecution zeroed in on behavior, on how control isn't always loud or obvious. It's often silent, calculated, precise. They returned to the footage, to a close-up still taken seconds before Diddy opened the bedroom door. It showed his face half-lit, eyes staring directly at the hallway camera. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't cautious. He looked directly into the lens like he knew it was there, like he didn't care. Or worse, like he knew no one would ever see it. The prosecutor held up the image and said, "This is not a man who was surprised to be caught. This is a man who expected to be invisible." That line echoed in the gallery. And Diddy, usually composed, leaned into his attorney. He wiped his brow. He stared forward, jaw clenched. Something had shifted. He wasn't just defending against accusations. Now he was being confronted with digital proof that the narrative wasn't in his control anymore. And that's where the core mechanism of manipulation truly came into focus, not just in Diddy's access to the home or the ability to disable surveillance, but in his historic ability to shape the story. Kim herself had written about it. In an unsent email recovered from her cloud storage, she wrote, "He used to tell me, 'No one will believe you. I own the narrative. I am the story.'" For years, she had stayed quiet. Whether from fear, loyalty, or self-preservation, she hadn't told the world what she'd seen. But the email showed she was done protecting him. She was preparing to speak, and Diddy, allegedly, knew it. Her friends had heard her talk about being watched, about cameras not working when they should, about noises in the night, gates unlocking, footsteps in the hall. "It's like he knows when they're off," she told one cousin. That wasn't paranoia. That was pattern recognition, and the 12-second blackout matched those patterns too perfectly to ignore. Control in this case wasn't just physical. It was digital, psychological, institutional. It was having access to her home while she was alone. It was disabling her ability to document what happened inside her own bedroom. It was embedding fear so deeply that even as she tried to speak up, she worried no one would believe her. That's why the footage mattered. Not because it showed a crime in progress, but because it showed the mechanisms that protect powerful men. The silent codes, the missing footage, the legal access disguised as innocence, and most of all, the moment where silence replaced truth. In that 12-second void, everything Kim had feared became possible. And that's what the courtroom finally saw, the quiet, calculated machinery of control operating in real time. Not with violence, but with access, and the belief that the world would never look closely enough to notice. Until now, when Kim Porter was found dead in her bedroom, just 3 days after the surveillance footage captured Diddy entering her home in the middle of the night. The initial shock was met with disbelief, but also silence. The official report stated she died from lobar pneumonia, a bacterial infection of the lungs. No foul play was suspected at the time. No further questions were publicly asked. The world mourned a mother, a model, a beloved figure in entertainment, and then it moved on. But inside that courtroom, years later, the silence was no longer enough. As the jury listened to testimony after testimony, it became clear that Kim's death left behind far more than grief. It left a web of unspoken trauma, public suspicion, and professional fallout. Her children lost a mother under circumstances that now, in light of the evidence, didn't seem so natural. Her family and friends were left with questions that never made it into headlines. And the man at the center of it, Sean Combs, was no longer just a hip-hop mogul. He was now a central figure in a case that questioned not just one night, but decades of influence, access, and unchecked power. The courtroom was presented with medical testimony from Dr. Helen Mahoney, an independent forensic pathologist who reviewed Kim's autopsy in full. Her analysis shattered the original narrative. According to her, the symptoms and medical progression described in the official report didn't match what one would expect from a fatal case of pneumonia. Kim had undergone a full health screening just a month before her death and tested negative for any flu or respiratory infections. There were no documented signs of coughing, fever, or shortness of breath. More disturbingly, Dr. Mahoney pointed to sedative compounds found in Kim's system, levels high enough to raise red flags. Not typical sleep aid dosages, not casual use. These were the kind of levels seen in patients being prepped for surgery or restrained. Her findings introduced a possibility too chilling to ignore, that Kim may have been incapacitated, without her consent. And then came the paperwork trail, or rather, what was missing from it. Dr. Mahoney revealed that a request for a secondary toxicology report had been submitted and then canceled within 24 hours. That request could have provided deeper clarity, but someone pulled it before it ever happened. That happened before the funeral, before the media attention faded, before anyone had time to ask the right questions. When the prosecutor asked, "Can you rule out foul play?" Mahoney's answer was calm but firm. "No, not with what I've seen. There are too many inconsistencies, too many closed doors." That single line changed the weight of the courtroom. It reframed Kim's death not as a tragedy, but as a potential cover-up. And it put a spotlight on the system that had allowed it to go unchallenged for so long. Professionally, the consequences rippled far beyond the courtroom. Diddy, once untouchable in music, fashion, and business, began to fracture under the pressure. Social media, which had once celebrated his success and legacy, turned sharp and unrelenting. Memes began to circulate, comment sections filled with disbelief and disgust. The phrase 12 seconds started trending, not as a tribute, but as a question. What happened in those 12 seconds of blacked-out footage? Inside the courtroom, sketch artists drew him hunched forward, hands clasped, jaw locked tight. The polished image he had crafted over decades of confidence, charisma, invincibility was starting to crack. Journalists noted the change. "Diddy cracks under pressure," one headline read. Another called it "the moment the mask slipped." For someone who built his empire on control of image and narrative, losing command of that courtroom was catastrophic. And unlike past scandals, this one couldn't be spun away with PR or buried under settlements. This wasn't a civil suit. This was under oath. The professional cost didn't stop with perception. Endorsement deals began to dissolve quietly. Brands that had long aligned with Diddy's name started distancing themselves. Entertainment partners paused collaborations. Business executives who had once fought to be in his orbit began ghosting. Behind closed doors, phone calls stopped being returned. On camera, smiles turned cautious. And as damaging as that was, the emotional toll seemed even more raw. Witnesses described how Diddy, usually poised and collected, had started unraveling. He wiped his brow repeatedly, whispered frantically to his attorneys. At times, he simply froze, hands flat on the defense table, eyes wide, like a man trying to hold himself together. This wasn't the public persona. This wasn't the man who owned the room. This was someone facing the weight of consequences he had never publicly confronted. But Kim's story wasn't just unraveling Diddy's reputation. It was also exposing a much deeper rot, the culture of fear and silence that had surrounded him. Multiple people came forward with stories of similar intimidation, pressure, NDAs, and sudden disappearances from the public eye. One by one, whispers turned to testimonies. Each story alone was troubling. Together, they painted a damning pattern. Kim wasn't just collateral. She was the person who saw everything, and she may have been preparing to blow the entire thing open. Prosecutors emphasized that Kim had become a liability not just because of what she knew, but because she was ready to speak. Her draft email, titled "What I Know About Puff," recovered from her cloud drive, was never sent. But its content, detailed timelines, party names, celebrity involvement, and documentation of illegal NDAs, proved she was no longer content with silence. She was planning something big, and if the timing of her death is any indicator, someone else may have known it. This wasn't just the fall of a music mogul. It was the unraveling of a carefully maintained illusion. The damage to Diddy's brand, his credibility, and his inner circle was undeniable. What had once been a fortress of influence now looked more like a house of cards, and Kim Porter's truth, though buried for years, was pulling it apart piece by piece. In that courtroom, the personal and professional consequences of silence Control and manipulation weren't just on display, they were unraveling in real time. What happened to Kim Porter wasn't just a loss, it was a reckoning. And now, for the first time, the world was watching. Kim Porter didn't just fear for her life, she foresaw its end. And she didn't let that fear silence her. In the weeks leading up to her death, Kim took steps that now, under the brutal light of courtroom evidence, read like a blueprint for justice. They weren't cries for help in the traditional sense. They were calculated moves, written records, digital trails. A woman making sure that if anything happened, her truth wouldn't be buried with her. What the world is only now beginning to understand is that Kim wasn't planning to vanish. She was preparing to speak. At the center of this preparation was a single unsent email, titled, "What I Know About Puff." The document was recovered from her cloud storage and presented in court as sealed evidence. The email wasn't addressed to anyone specifically, but the content was undeniable. This wasn't an emotional rant. It wasn't a vague warning. It was structured, methodical, complete with bullet points, timelines, names, and places. She detailed specific dates of secret parties, hotels booked under aliases, NDAs forced under duress, and celebrities she claimed had either participated or been emotionally damaged by the environments Diddy allegedly curated. It wasn't speculation. It was a ledger. The kind of document you write not because you're scared, but because you're done being scared. She started with a simple, chilling statement. "This is the truth. I'm tired of carrying it, tired of being quiet while people hurt others and get away with it. I'm scared, but I'm done being scared." These weren't the words of someone trying to create noise. They were the words of someone trying to make sure her silence couldn't be bought, erased, or ignored anymore. Each paragraph dug deeper into the dark undercurrents of an empire, built on power, loyalty, and fear. Kim knew she was crossing a line, and yet she crossed it anyway, and the evidence shows she didn't stop at writing. Kim had already been in contact with a prominent investigative journalist. According to sealed depositions, the journalist claimed Kim was preparing to go public. She had shared files, contracts, communications, flight logs, and was planning a tell-all memoir. The timing was deliberate. Her children were older. Her career was no longer reliant on Diddy's influence. For the first time in years, she was outside his control. And that's when she began planning her exit, from the silence, from the shadows, from the role she'd played for too long. The decision to speak wasn't impulsive. It was layered with concern for her family, her safety, and the potential fallout. But despite the risks, her messages reveal a woman with clarity of purpose. In one text, she wrote, "I don't want revenge. I just want people to know what really happened. I just want peace." In another, sent just 48 hours before her death, she texted a cousin, "If I'm gone, please tell the truth. I'm done covering for him." That message was never opened. Kim Porter was found dead 2 days later. In court, the impact of her words was undeniable. One member of the jury reportedly wiped away tears as the email was read aloud. Another sat stone-faced, gripping the armrest of his chair. Even the courtroom sketch artist stopped drawing, transfixed by the raw weight of her message. This wasn't tabloid drama. It wasn't another Hollywood exposé. It was a dying woman's last effort to leave something behind that couldn't be erased. And in doing so, Kim Porter didn't just accuse, she revealed. She made it clear that behind the glamour and the legacy was a system designed to silence. But this story isn't only about uncovering what happened to Kim. It's about what happens next, her decision to speak up, even if only in drafts and voice notes, has already sparked waves across the entertainment industry. The trial brought to light just how normalized silence and fear had become in Diddy's inner circle, and how rare it was for anyone to break free of that grip. But Kim did. And now, others are beginning to follow. Since the trial began, additional witnesses have come forward. Former employees, assistants, and acquaintances have submitted testimony or reached out to prosecutors. Some describe similar patterns of intimidation. Others, once bound by NDAs, are challenging them. One former insider wrote anonymously to a reporter. "I stayed quiet because I didn't think anyone would believe me. But after Kim's story came out, I knew I had to talk. She did everything she could. The least we can do is help finish what she started." That ripple effect, the decision to speak because someone else had the courage to, is what makes Kim Porter's legacy so powerful. She wasn't a victim who faded quietly into the background. She was a woman who knew her life was at risk and still chose to leave a record. Not because she wanted fame, not because she needed validation, but because she believed in the truth. And now, the conversation around Kim's death is bigger than her. It's about the culture that enabled her fears to come true. It's about the silence that kept so many others from coming forward. It's about accountability for those who abuse power and for the systems that allow them to keep it. As prosecutors told the jury, this isn't a murder trial yet, but it is a trial about power, pattern, and silence, and Kim Porter was silenced. Her story has already changed the tone of this case, and possibly the industry itself. What started as speculation is now being regarded as a warning ignored. And in that courtroom, the energy has shifted. No one looks at this case the same way anymore. No one hears her name without feeling the weight of what she tried to do. The hope now is that the system will finally listen, that her email, her texts, her recordings, everything she left behind won't just be evidence in a trial, but a turning point in how we talk about power and protection. Because Kim Porter didn't just die. She tried to tell us why she might. And that act alone may be what finally changes everything. Kim Porter's story is no longer just a cautionary tale buried beneath headlines and sealed reports. It's a powerful reckoning, one that has forced both the courtroom and the public to confront what happens when someone close to power refuses to stay silent. Her death, once ruled as the result of natural causes, has now been re-examined through the lens of digital evidence, forensic testimony, and the words she left behind. And in doing so, the world is beginning to understand that her final days were not marked by randomness, but by rising urgency and a deliberate attempt to break free from years of silence. Her texts, voicemails, journal entries, and the unsent. Email titled "What I Know About Puff" are not just chilling, they're heartbreaking. They show us a woman who understood exactly how dangerous the truth could be and still chose to document it. Kim wasn't reckless. She was precise, strategic, a mother thinking about her children, a woman trying to protect her legacy. She knew that silence was a currency in Diddy's world, and she was done trading in it, and it's that decision to speak even when no one was listening that's changed everything. Her words have echoed far beyond the courtroom. They've reached people who once felt powerless, who now see in Kim a reflection of their own struggle, the choice to either protect the powerful or tell the truth. She made her choice. And though she may not have lived to see its impact, the weight of her testimony is finally being felt. Sean Combs, once the untouchable mogul at the center of music and culture, now sits in a courtroom where silence no longer shields him. The 12 seconds of blacked-out surveillance footage are more than missing data. They are a metaphor for every time someone chose not to ask questions, every time someone accepted the version of the story that suited the powerful. But that darkness no longer holds. The timeline is exposed. The messages are read. The silence is broken. Kim's journey, from quiet concern to documented fear, from unsent emails to courtroom revelations, is now part of a much larger narrative. A narrative about the cost of speaking out and the devastating consequences of being ignored. Her voice, once confined to drafts and recordings, has now become a catalyst for truth. And if there's anything this trial has made clear, it's that Kim Porter didn't just try to survive, she tried to protect others. She tried to make sure the truth would outlive her. As the trial continues and the world watches, the final chapter of Kim Porter's life is still being written. Not by speculation, but by facts. Not by rumors, but by her own words. And maybe, just maybe, the message she left behind will do what she always hoped: force people to listen, force people to believe, and finally, force people to change. Kim Porter didn't just die. She warned us. She wrote it. She recorded it. And in those final days, she tried to leave behind the one thing they couldn't erase: her truth. And now that truth is finally being heard. If her story shook you, if you felt that silence becomes sound, then don't let it fade again. Like this video. Share it. Drop a comment below, because your voice might be the one that carries hers even further. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. We're not just telling stories, we're making sure they're never forgotten. Because when one woman speaks up, even in whispers, it echoes forever.